Sometimes the people we think we know best are the ones we never understood at all. For 57-year-old Tanner Ryse, standing in the ruins of his father's old gas station, that truth hit harder than any conversation they never had. His siblings just wanted to sell the property and move on. But when the demolition crew tore away the rotted counter, Tanner found a locked tin box and old ledgers from the Dust Bowl years. Inside were records his father never mentioned. Debts forgiven, meals given to hungry families, acts of kindness when money was scarce. His father had helped people survive the hardest times and never said a word about it. What else had the old man kept hidden? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The phone call had come on a Tuesday morning, which seemed fitting somehow. Tuesdays had always felt like the most ordinary day of the week to Tanner Ryse, and there was something grimly appropriate about receiving news of his father's death on such an unremarkable day. He'd been sitting at his kitchen table, nursing his second cup of coffee and pretending to review lesson plans for his substitute teaching gig, when his brother Jack's name appeared on the screen. "He's gone," Jack had said. No preamble, no softening of the blow. That was Jack's way, direct, efficient, emotionally economical. Heart attack. Quick, they said. He didn't suffer. Tanner had sat there for a long moment, the phone pressed to his ear, waiting for something to surface. Grief, maybe. Relief, perhaps. But what came instead was a hollow sensation, like discovering an empty room where you expected to find furniture. His father had been 73 years old, and they hadn't spoken in over a decade. The last conversation they had had was brief and stilted, full of the careful politeness that strangers use when they're trying not to give offense. "The funeral's Saturday," Jack continued. "Caroline's flying in from Denver. I figure we can meet at the house afterward. Go through his things, figure out what to do with the property." The property, that's what they called it now. The old country store gas station that had been the center of their father's life for more than 50 years. Not Dad's place, or the station. Just property, a thing to be divided and disposed of, converted into cash, and distributed according to law. "I'll be there," Tanner had said, and ended the call. That was 3 weeks ago. Now Tanner stood in the wreckage of what had once been his childhood landmark, watching dust motes dance in the afternoon light that streamed through holes in the collapsed roof. The demolition crew had started work 2 days earlier, following Jack's efficient timeline. They'd made quick progress. The gas pumps were already gone, hauled away for scrap. The canopy that had once sheltered customers from rain and summer, sun lay in twisted pieces at the edge of the property. The store itself was half demolished, one wall standing like a stubborn memorial while the others had been reduced to piles of broken lumber and shattered glass. Tanner was 57 years old, a widower for 3 years, and a father to a 16-year-old daughter who barely spoke to him anymore. He taught history at a community college when they needed someone, filled in at the high school when they were desperate, and spent most of his evenings in an apartment that still felt temporary, even though he'd lived there since Sarah died. His wife's death from breast cancer had been slow and cruel, giving them time to say goodbye, but not enough time to prepare for the absence that would follow. Maya, their daughter, had been 13 when her mother died. She was 16 now, and the girl who used to curl up next to Tanner on the couch to watch old movies had been replaced by a stranger who communicated primarily through closed doors and text messages that arrived with the emotional warmth of weather reports. The funeral had been small. His father hadn't been a joiner, hadn't belonged to any clubs or organizations, hadn't maintained close friendships in his later years. There were maybe 20 people at the service, most of them elderly residents of the town who came out of respect for longevity rather than affection. Jack had given a brief eulogy that focused on their father's work ethic and dedication to the business. Carolyn had read a poem that Tanner suspected she'd found on the internet that morning. Tanner himself had said nothing, standing between his siblings like a placeholder, present but not participating. Afterward, they'd gathered at Jack's house. He'd stayed in the area, built a successful contracting business, raised 3 kids who all seemed well-adjusted and normal in ways that made Tanner feel like he'd failed some fundamental test of parenting. Caroline had flown in from Denver, where she worked in pharmaceutical sales, drove a company car, lived in a condo with mountain views, and cultivated an air of having escaped something the rest of them were still trapped in. The conversation had been businesslike. The house, a small ranch-style place their father had moved into after selling the land around the gas station, would need to be cleared out and sold. The station property had already been appraised. Jack had a buyer lined up, someone looking to put in a dollar store or maybe a chain convenience store. The numbers were discussed, divided by 3, deemed acceptable. "We should just demolish it," Jack had said, gesturing with his beer bottle toward some invisible version of the gas station. "It's not worth trying to salvage anything. The structure's compromised, the tanks are probably leaking, and nobody wants an old-style gas station anyway. Clean slate, that's what the buyer wants." Caroline had agreed immediately. She had a flight back to Denver on Monday and wanted everything settled before she left. "It's just a building," she'd said, "and it's not like any of us have good memories of the place." That part was true, or at least it felt true in the moment. Tanner's memories of the gas station were complicated, tangled up with feelings he'd spent decades trying not to examine too closely. He remembered summer days working there as a teenager, the smell of motor oil and gasoline, the heat radiating off the asphalt, his father's constant criticism of how Tanner pumped gas or made change or talked to customers. He remembered the long silences, the way his father could go hours without speaking except to issue instructions. He remembered leaving for college and feeling like he'd escaped a prison sentence. But he also remembered other things, fragments that didn't fit the narrative of escape and relief. Sunday mornings when the station was closed and his father would let young Tanner help him with paperwork, showing him how to balance the books, explaining profit margins and wholesale costs with a patience he rarely displayed otherwise. The old Coca-Cola cooler that his father kept stocked even after the company wanted him to upgrade to a modern machine, because he liked the sound the bottles made when you pulled them out of the ice water. The way his father knew every regular customer by name, asked about their families, remembered details about their lives. After his mother died, Tanner was 23, just finishing college, his father had retreated into a silence so profound it felt like a physical barrier. Tanner had tried, in the beginning, to bridge that gap. He'd driven home on weekends, helped at the station, attempted conversations that went nowhere. His father would nod, grunt occasionally, return to whatever task occupied his hands. After a year of this, Tanner had stopped trying. He'd taken a teaching job 3 hours away, visited on major holidays, sent cards on birthdays. The distance between them had become geographical, and then something more, a gulf measured not in miles, but in all the words they never said. Jack and Caroline had their own versions of this story, their own catalogues of disappointment and unmet expectations. Jack, the oldest, had wanted to take over the business, expand it, turn it into something profitable. Their father had refused every suggestion, insisted on doing things the way they'd always been done, and eventually Jack had walked away to start his own company. Caroline, the youngest, had simply wanted attention, any acknowledgement that she existed beyond being another mouth to feed, another responsibility to manage. She'd left for college and rarely looked back, building a life as far from the gas station as she could manage. So when Jack said they should demolish it, and Caroline agreed, Tanner had nodded along. What else was there to do? It was just a building, just property. Just another thing their father had left behind without explanation or instruction. But then the demolition had started, and Tanner had felt compelled to come watch. He'd told himself it was about closure, about witnessing the end of something. He'd driven the 3 hours from his apartment, parked on the road, and walked across the lot that used to be full of cars waiting for service. The town had changed in the years since he'd lived here. The population had dropped from nearly 8,000 to less than 5,000. Main Street, which had once been lined with family-owned shops, now had more empty storefronts than occupied ones. The old movie theater was boarded up. The hardware store had closed. Even the diner where Tanner had eaten countless meals as a teenager was hanging on by a thread, kept alive by elderly customers who had nowhere else to go. The gas station sat on the edge of town, where the highway used to bring steady traffic before they'd built the interstate 15 miles north. Tanner's father had refused to relocate, refused to adapt, and slowly the business had withered. By the time he died, the station had been closed for nearly 3 years, the pumps dry, the store empty except for whatever his father had been too stubborn or too tired to throw away. The demolition crew had left for the day, would return tomorrow to finish the job. Tanner stood in what used to be the main store area, surrounded by rubble and ruin. The old wooden counter was still partially intact, lying at an angle where it had fallen when they'd torn out the wall behind it. He could see the rings where coffee cups had left their marks over decades, the groove worn into the wood where his father had leaned his elbows while talking to customers. That's when he saw it. The tin box. It had been behind the counter, hidden in a space that must have been deliberately concealed. The demolition had exposed it, and now it sat among broken boards and plastered dust, rust-colored and ancient-looking, about the size of a shoebox, but made of metal with a simple latch and lock. Tanner climbed over the debris and picked it up. It was heavier than he expected, and something inside shifted when he moved it. The lock was old, probably wouldn't take much force to break, but something made him hesitate. Next to where the box had been, he saw the corner of a notebook protruding from what used to be a built-in shelf. He pulled it free, and then another, and another. 4 ledgers in total, the kind with marbled covers that accountants used decades ago, before everything moved to computers. He opened the first one carefully. The pages were yellowed and brittle, but the handwriting was clear, his father's distinctive script, precise and economical. The date started in 1934. Tanner did the math. His father would have been 23 years old, just starting out. The entries were methodical, names, amounts, dates. But it wasn't standard bookkeeping. Next to many of the amounts were notations. Paid in labor, family of 6, will settle when able, forgiven. Tanner sat down on a chunk of broken concrete and began to read. The first dozen pages covered a period of about 6 months during 1934. The Dust Bowl years, when desperate families from Oklahoma and Arkansas and Texas had poured through this part of the country, heading west to California, running from drought and failure and hunger. And here, in his father's careful handwriting, was a record of their passage. The Henderson family, $3 in gas, 2 loaves of bread, a gallon of milk. Paid in labor, Mr. Henderson fixed the sign. The Wilsons, $5 in gas, food for 4, water. Paid when able. The Brecker family, $7 in gas, supplies. Family of 8, all children under 12. Forgiven. Page after page of names, amounts, notations. Tanner's throat tightened as he read. His father had been helping these people, these desperate families fleeing disaster. And he'd kept a record, not for collection purposes, but as a testament. These people mattered enough to be remembered, their struggles worthy of documentation. His phone buzzed. A text from Maya. Staying at Aunt Lisa's this weekend. Told her you approved. Tanner stared at the message. He hadn't approved anything, hadn't even known Maya was planning to stay with Jack's wife. But this was how they communicated now. His daughter informed him of decisions after she'd already made them, and Tanner accepted them because fighting seemed to make everything worse. He typed back, "Okay, love you." No response came. He didn't expect one. The sun was setting, painting the ruins in shades of orange and gold. Tanner gathered the ledgers carefully, tucked the tin box under his arm, and made his way back to his car. He'd gotten a room at the motel on the highway, the only lodging left in town. Tomorrow, Jack would expect him to approve the demolition schedule, sign whatever papers needed signing. Caroline would call from Denver, wanting confirmation that everything was proceeding according to plan. But as Tanner drove through the empty streets of his hometown, past darkened storefronts and houses that seemed to be sagging under the weight of years, he felt something shifting inside him. The hollow sensation that had accompanied news of his father's death was filling with something else. Not quite grief, not quite curiosity, but a need to understand what he'd missed, what they'd all missed. His father had been 23 years old when he started keeping these ledgers, the same age Tanner had been when his mother died, and his father retreated into silence. What had happened in the years between? What had turned a young man who carefully recorded acts of kindness into an old man who couldn't speak to his own children? The tin box sat on the passenger seat, locked and mysterious. Tanner didn't have a key, didn't know if one existed, but he would open it, would read whatever else his father had left behind. Not for closure. That seemed like too neat an ending, too simple a resolution. But for understanding, for the chance to know the man his father had been before he became the father, Tanner remembered. The motel room was exactly what he expected. Bland, functional, depressing. He set the ledgers on the small table by the window, placed the tin box next to them, and sat down to continue reading. Outside, the highway hummed with occasional traffic, people passing through on their way to somewhere else, just like those Dust Bowl families had passed through 80 years ago. Tanner opened the second ledger and began to read his father's history, one careful entry at a time. The tin box resisted his first attempt to open it. Tanner had tried working a penknife into the lock mechanism, but the metal was corroded, fused together by decades of rust and neglect. He sat on the motel bed at 2 a.m, the box on his lap, feeling ridiculous and desperate in equal measure. Finally, he'd driven to a 24-hour Walmart 3 towns over and bought a small crowbar. Back in the room, he wedged it under the latch and applied steady pressure. The metal groaned, resisted, then gave way with a sharp crack that seemed too loud in the quiet room. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had mostly disintegrated, were photographs. Dozens of them, some formal portraits, others casual snapshots, all from another era. Tanner spread them carefully on the bed, treating each one like the artifact it was. The first photograph he picked up stopped him cold. It showed a young man, his father unmistakably, though Tanner had never seen him look this way. James Ryse stood in front of the gas station, which looked new and bright in the image, the paint fresh, the signs gleaming. Next to him stood a family, a man, a woman, and 5 children ranging from perhaps 10 years old to an infant in the mother's arms. Everyone was smiling despite their worn, dusty clothing. The adults' faces showed the kind of weariness that goes bone deep, but there was hope there too, fragile and determined. Tanner turned the photograph over. On the back, in his father's handwriting, the Hendersons, June 1936. Made it to California. Sent this from Bakersfield. They found work. He remembered the name from the ledger. The Hendersons had been one of the first entries, one of the families his father had helped with gas and food, and they'd made it. They'd survived, found work, sent a photograph back to the young man who'd shown them kindness when they needed it most. Tanner picked up another photograph. A different family, this one with 3 children. The notation on the back. The Wilsons, August 1936. Settled in Oregon. Mr. Wilson got work in a lumber mill. Another. The Breckers. Made it through. All 8 children healthy. Mr. Brecker sent $2 every month for a year. Told him it was paid in full. One by one, Tanner went through the photographs. Not all of them had happy endings written on the back. Some just had names and dates. Some had brief notes. Lost touch, or don't know what happened. But many, more than he would have expected. Showed families who had made it through, who had survived the Dust Bowl and the Depression, and had remembered the young man at the gas station who'd helped them when they needed it most. Beneath the photographs was a bundle of letters, tied with string that crumbled when Tanner touched it. He unfolded the first one carefully. The paper was thin, the kind you bought when money was scarce and every penny mattered. The handwriting was careful but unpracticed, the work of someone for whom writing was a labor. "Dear Mr. Ryse," it began, "I am writing to thank you for your kindness to my family in June of 1936. We were heading west with nothing but hope and $3. You gave us gas and food and asked for nothing in return. I want you to know that we made it to California. My husband found work in the orchards. It has been hard, but we are managing. Our children are healthy. I pray for you every night and thank God that there are still good people in this world. You saved our lives without asking for anything. May God bless you and keep you. Sincerely, Eleanor Martinez." The date on the letter was October 1936. Tanner read it again, then set it aside and picked up another. This one was from a man named Robert Wilson, dated April 1937. "Mr. Ryse, I wanted to let you know we made it to Oregon like we planned. Found work at a lumber mill in Eugene. The pay is fair and we have a place to live. I can't repay you properly for what you did, but I'm sending what I can. You gave us hope when we had none left. My wife says you are an angel. I'm not a religious man, but I think she might be right. Thank you." Letter after letter, testimonies to his father's kindness during those desperate years. Families writing from California, Oregon, Washington, even a few from Arizona and New Mexico. Some sent money, small amounts, $1 or $2. Others sent photographs. Several sent promises to repay when they could. Tanner found himself crying, tears dropping onto the old paper before he could stop them. This was his father. Not the silent, withdrawn man he remembered, but someone else entirely. Someone who had seen suffering and responded with generosity. Someone who had kept these letters, these photographs, these records of human kindness and connection. Why had he never told them? Why had he hidden all of this away behind a counter, locked in a tin box where no one would find it? Tanner's phone rang, shattering the silence. Jack's name on the screen. He wiped his eyes and answered. "You coming by the station this morning?" Jack asked. No greeting, just the question. "Crew wants to finish up today. Need your signature on the disposal permits." Tanner looked at the photograph spread across the motel bed, the letters in his lap, the ledgers on the table. "I need more time," he said. "Time for what?" "Tanner, we've been over this. The buyer wants a clean lot. We're already paying for the demolition. Another day means—" "I found something," Tanner interrupted. "At the station, Dad's records from the Dust Bowl years, letters, photographs. Jack, he was helping people, families heading west. He gave them gas, food, supplies, kept detailed records of every person he helped." Silence on the other end. Then, So, don't you want to know about this? Don't you want to see?" "See what, Tanner? Evidence that Dad gave away money we could have used, that he helped strangers while his own family struggled. I know you've got this romantic idea of who he was, but the reality is he ran a failing business and left us with nothing but debts and a building we have to pay to tear down. That's not fair." "Fair? You want to talk about fair? You left Tanner. You went to college, got married, built a life somewhere else. Caroline did the same thing. I'm the one who stayed. I'm the one who watched him turn away help, refuse to adapt, drive that business into the ground because he was too proud or too stubborn to change. So don't tell me what's fair." Tanner closed his eyes. Jack's anger wasn't new. It had been there for years, an undercurrent in every family gathering, every phone call. But hearing it stated so plainly was different. "I just need a few more days," Tanner said quietly, "to go through everything, to understand what he was doing. He was doing what he always did, putting everyone else first, and it cost him everything. It cost us everything. Jack's voice softened slightly. Look, I get it. You want to find something good in all of this, but tearing down that building doesn't erase what he did for those people. It's just an old building, Tanner. Let it go like Dad let everything else go. The line went dead. Tanner sat holding the phone, feeling the weight of his brother's words. Maybe Jack was right. Maybe this was just sentimentality, a desperate attempt to find meaning in ruins. But then he looked at the photograph of his father with the Henderson family, saw the hope in those tired faces, read the gratitude in Eleanor Martinez's careful handwriting. These weren't abstract acts of charity. These were real people, real families who had been helped at the most desperate moment of their lives, and his father had done it quietly, without recognition, without expectation of repayment. The leather journal was still in the tin box. Tanner had noticed it earlier, but hadn't opened it yet. Now he pulled it out, noting how different it was from the ledgers. This was personal, the leather worn smooth by handling, the pages filled with his father's handwriting in a less formal style. He opened to the first page. The date, January 1968. His father would have been 57 years old, the same age Tanner was now. The entry began, "I have decided to keep this record, though I am not sure who will ever read it. There are things happening that need to be documented, even if no one believes me, especially if no one believes me." Tanner turned the page and began to read the story his father had never told. Morning found Tanner back at the gas station, the journal tucked under his arm, the letters and photographs secured in his car. He'd read the first few entries before exhaustion claimed him around 4 a.m. What he'd found had left him unsettled, questions multiplying faster than answers. The demolition crew hadn't arrived yet. Tanner stood in the ruins, seeing it differently now. Every broken board, every piece of shattered glass felt like evidence of something larger than just a failed business. He'd brought the first ledger with him and started cross-referencing names with his phone. Some of the families had been local, not migrants passing through. The Pattersons, the Caldwells, the Mitchells, names he recognized from growing up here. He'd gone to school with a Caldwell, played baseball with a Mitchell. These families were still here, their descendants woven into the fabric of the town. The diner opened at 6. Tanner walked the 3 blocks, past empty storefronts and houses that seemed held together by memory rather than maintenance. The same bell above the door that he remembered from childhood chimed when he entered. Ruth Sanderson looked up from behind the counter. She'd been old when Tanner was young, and now she seemed ancient, though her eyes were sharp and her movements steady as she poured coffee. "Tanner Ryse," she said, not quite a question. "Heard you were back in town. Sorry about your father." He took a seat at the counter. "Thanks, Ruth." She set a cup of coffee in front of him without asking. "You eating?" "Just coffee's fine." He pulled out the ledger, opened it to a page he'd marked. "Ruth, I found something at the station. Dad's old records from the 30s and 40s. Your name's in here, your family's name." Her expression shifted, something complicated passing across her features. "That so? Says here that in 1942, the Sanderson family, that's your parents, right, came to the station. Your father needed gas to get to Lincoln. Emergency. Dad gave him a full tank, wouldn't take payment." Ruth was quiet for a moment, her hand resting on the counter. When she spoke, her voice was soft. "I was 6 years old. My baby brother had pneumonia, wasn't responding to anything Doc Harrison tried. Daddy had to get him to the hospital in Lincoln, but we didn't have money for gas. Your father filled the tank, put food in a basket for Mama and us kids. Told Daddy to drive fast and not worry about paying. What happened? My brother lived, 78 years old now, lives in Florida with his grandchildren." She looked at Tanner directly. Your father saved his life. Never mentioned it again. When Daddy tried to pay him back, James wouldn't hear of it. Said there was nothing to pay back. Tanner felt something crack open inside him. He never told us. Any of us. That was his way. Ruth refilled his coffee, though he'd barely touched it. Your father helped half this town at one point or another. During the war, when rationing hit hard, he organized a system so everyone got their fair share. During the recession in the 70s, he extended credit to families who couldn't pay. Never made a fuss about it. Never expected anything in return. Then why? Tanner stopped, unsure how to finish the question. Why did he end up alone? Why did the business fail? Ruth shook her head. Wrong questions. The right question is, why did he keep helping even when it cost him everything? Before Tanner could respond, his phone buzzed. A text from Maya. Why are you still there? Thought you were coming back yesterday. He typed, found some things of Grandpa's, trying to understand them. Can we talk later? The response came immediately. Whatever. Ruth was watching him. That your daughter? Yeah. She looks like Sarah. Saw her at the funeral. You two doing okay? The question was gentle, but it hit hard. We're managing. Managing's not the same as okay. Ruth turned away to help another customer, leaving Tanner alone with his coffee and his father's ledger. He spent the next 2 hours walking through town, knocking on doors, asking questions. Mrs. Patterson at the county clerk's office remembered his father organizing a food drive during the harsh winter of 1977. Mr. Caldwell, who ran the hardware store until it closed, recalled his father helping him secure a loan when the bank refused. Mrs. Mitchell, now in her 80s, wept when Tanner showed her the entry in the ledger, documenting how his father had paid for her daughter's medicine when the family had nothing. Every person had a story. Every story painted the same picture of a man who saw need and responded, who helped without condition, who never spoke about what he'd done. By the time Tanner returned to the gas station, the demolition crew had arrived. Jack was there too, looking impatient. Finally, Jack said, thought you'd skip town. Sign here, here, and here. He thrust papers at Tanner. I've been talking to people, Tanner said, not taking the papers. About Dad. About what he did for families in this town. Great. You took a trip down memory lane. Now can we finish this? Jack, did you know he helped Ruth Sanderson's family? Probably saved her brother's life. Did you know he organized food drives and helped people get loans and let his own family struggle? Jack interrupted. You think I don't know what he did? I know, Tanner. I know he gave away gas when we needed new tires. I know he extended credit when we couldn't afford school supplies. I know he was generous to everyone except the people who should have mattered most. That's not. It is fair. You weren't here. You didn't see Mom working 2 jobs because the station barely broke even. You didn't hear them fighting about money, about bills they couldn't pay. You weren't here when she got sick and Dad still wouldn't raise his prices. Still wouldn't turn anyone away, even when we were drowning in medical debt. Tanner felt the words like physical blows. He'd been away at college when his mother got sick. By the time he came home, she was already in the final stages. He'd never known about the fights, the financial stress. His father had never mentioned it. I didn't know, Tanner said quietly. No, you didn't. Because that's what Dad did. He suffered in silence and expected everyone else to do the same. Jack's anger was draining, leaving exhaustion in its place. I'm not saying he was a bad man, but he wasn't a saint either. He made choices, and those choices had consequences. For him, for Mum, for all of us. A car pulled up. Caroline's rental. She got out, looking polished and professional and irritated. What's the holdup? I thought this would be done by now. Tanner looked at his siblings, at the ruins of their father's station, at the ledger in his hands. Caroline. "Did you know Dad kept records of everyone he helped? Letters, photographs, detailed accounts going back to the Dust Bowl?" "So what?" Caroline's response was sharp. "He helped people. Good for him. Doesn't change the fact that he was emotionally absent. Doesn't change the fact that he couldn't show his own children a fraction of the kindness he showed strangers." "Maybe he didn't know how," Tanner said. "Then maybe he should have learned." Caroline's voice broke slightly. "I spent my whole childhood trying to get him to notice me, to care. After Mom died, I would have settled for him just talking to me. But he couldn't even do that. So forgive me if I'm not impressed by his charity work." She was right. They were both right. Their father had been generous to strangers and silent with his family. He'd helped countless people and failed his own children. Both things could be true. Both things were true. But standing there in the ruins, Tanner felt certain there was more to the story. The journal, the entries he'd barely started reading, held answers to questions they hadn't thought to ask. "Give me 1 week," he said. 1 week to go through everything. Then we'll tear it down if that's what we decide. But I need to understand this first." Jack and Caroline exchanged looks. Finally, Jack shrugged. 1 week. But you're paying the crew to wait." It was something. Tanner nodded, and his siblings left, taking their anger and their hurt with them. Alone again, Tanner opened the journal and continued reading his father's secret history. The drawing fell from between the pages of the second ledger, fluttering to the ground like a dried leaf. Tanner picked it up carefully, aware that the paper was fragile. The crayon colors faded but still visible. It was the kind of picture a child draws. Simple, enthusiastic, unconcerned with proportion or perspective. The gas station was rendered in brown and red, square and solid. The pumps were blue cylinders. The sky was a strip of blue across the top of the page. And in front of the station stood a stick, figure with a huge smile, arms spread wide. Above the figure, in the careful printing of a young child, were the words, "Mr. Ryse the Angel." At the bottom of the page, in adult handwriting, from Susan Brecker, age 7, December 1938. Tanner sat down on a relatively stable piece of concrete, the drawing in his hands, and felt tears coming again. A 7-year-old child had called his father an angel, a child from one of those desperate families fleeing the Dust Bowl, someone who probably had very little reason to believe in angels or kindness or people who helped without asking for anything in return. He'd been cataloging the ledgers chronologically, trying to build a timeline of his father's actions. The entries stretched from 1934 through the late 1940s, documenting not just the famous Dust Bowl migration, but the entire Depression era and its aftermath. Hundreds of names, thousands of individual acts of help and kindness. What emerged was a portrait of someone Tanner had never known. His father, at 23, 25, 30 years old, had been a man who believed, fundamentally and completely, that you helped people when they needed help. Not for recognition, not for reward, but because it was what you did if you were human. Tanner had started making lists, cross-referencing the names in the ledgers with current residents. The task was painstaking, but revealing. The Patterson family, helped in 1938 when they needed supplies to make it through winter, had stayed in town. Mrs. Patterson now worked at the county clerk's office. The Caldwells, given extended credit during the war years, had run the hardware store for 3 generations. The Mitchells, the Harrisons, the Brewsters, the Donaldsons, all families still present in the community, all helped at critical moments by James Ryse. His phone rang. Maya actually calling instead of texting. He answered immediately. "Hey, sweetheart." "Dad." Her voice was small, uncertain. "I need you to come home. The school called Aunt Lisa. I'm in trouble." His heart sank. "What kind of trouble?" "I've been skipping classes. They want to have a meeting. You need to be there." He thought about the ledgers, The journal, the week he'd asked Jack and Caroline for. When? Tomorrow. Dad, I'm sorry. I couldn't deal with it. Everything feels like too much. The pain in her voice cut through everything else. It's okay. I'll be there. We'll figure it out together. After they hung up, Tanner sat in the ruins of his father's station and felt the weight of his own failures pressing down. He'd been so focused on understanding his father that he'd neglected his daughter. Again. Just like he'd been doing for 3 years since Sarah died. The drive home took 3 hours. He spent them thinking about parallel lines. His relationship with his father, his relationship with Maya. 2 generations of distance and silence, 2 sets of people who should have been close, but somehow weren't. The school meeting was as bad as he'd expected. Maya had been skipping classes for weeks. Her grades had dropped from B's to D's and F's. The counselor, a tired woman with kind eyes, suggested Maya was experiencing delayed grief reaction. The vice principal, less sympathetic, talked about academic consequences and the importance of attendance. Maya sat through it all with her head down, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. In the car afterward, Tanner tried to find the right words. Why didn't you tell me it was getting this bad? When would I tell you? You're never around, and when you are around, you're not really there. The accusation stung because it was true. You're right. I've been having a hard time too, since Mom died, but that's not your problem. You shouldn't have to deal with my grief. I'm not dealing with your grief, Dad. I'm dealing with my own, alone. They drove in silence for a while. Then Tanner said, I found something at Grandpa's station, records of people he helped during the Depression, letters thanking him, photographs, evidence of a whole side of him we never saw. Maya was quiet. Then, So I've been trying to understand why he never told us about it, why he kept it all hidden. Maybe he was ashamed. The observation startled him. Ashamed of what? He helped people. Ashamed that he couldn't help his own family the same way. Maya finally looked at him. That's what Aunt Caroline said at the funeral, that Grandpa was nice to everyone except the people who were supposed to matter. Tanner had no response. They drove the rest of the way in silence. At home, he made dinner, pasta, Maya's childhood favorite. She picked at it, clearly not hungry. He wanted to ask more questions, to find some way to bridge the gap between them, but everything he thought to say felt inadequate. I'm going to go back, he said finally. To the station, to finish going through everything, but I want you to come with me. Maya looked skeptical. Why? Because I think understanding Grandpa might help us understand some other things. About family, about how we deal with loss, about why we shut people out when we should be letting them in. You're making this into some kind of lesson. Maybe. Or maybe I just don't want to do this alone anymore. Something shifted in Maya's expression. Not quite agreement, but not quite refusal either. When? This weekend. We'll drive down Saturday morning. Stay a couple days. You can miss school. I'll call it a family emergency. It kind of is, though, isn't it? A family emergency. Yeah, Tanner said quietly. Yeah, it is. That weekend, they made the drive together. Maya brought her laptop, her phone, her headphones, all the barriers teenagers construct against the world. But she came, which felt like something. At the station, Tanner showed her the ledgers, the letters, the photographs. He watched her face as she read the simple testimonies of gratitude from families her great-grandfather had helped. Slowly, almost reluctantly, Maya's walls began to lower. This is kind of amazing, she said, holding the drawing from Susan Brecker. A kid drew this for him. He kept it for 80 years. They worked together, sorting through documents, creating piles, taking photographs. Maya had an idea. to scan everything and create a digital archive. "Someone should know about this," she said. "Not just us." In the late afternoon, while Maya was photographing ledger pages, Tanner found the pocket watch. It had been in a drawer of the old desk that had somehow survived the partial demolition. The watch was tarnished but intact, a solid piece of craftsmanship from another era. He turned it over. The engraving read, "To James Ryse, for your service. The town of Millbrook, 1944. "Maya, look at this." She came over, read the engraving. "What service?" Tanner didn't know. He pulled out his phone and started searching historical records for Millbrook, 1944. What he found made him catch his breath. "During the war," he read aloud, "when fuel rationing hit rural areas hard, James Ryse organized a county-wide distribution system that ensured every farm and essential service had access to gasoline. He worked with the rationing board to create a fair allocation system and personally managed distribution for 2 years. He did that." Maya looked at the watch, then at her father. "Why didn't anyone in the family know?" "I think that's what I'm trying to find out." Tanner opened the journal again, found the entries from 1944. His father had documented the rationing system in detail, not the recognition, but the logistics. Who needed what, how to distribute fairly, how to help people survive another crisis. As evening fell, Tanner and Maya sat in the ruins of the gas station, reading by flashlight, piecing together the life of a man neither of them had understood. And slowly, carefully, they began talking to each other. Really talking for the first time in years. The receipt books told a different story than the ledgers. Tanner and Maya had spent 2 days organizing documents chronologically. Now they were into the later years of the station's operation, the 1950s, 60s, 70s. The change was visible in the numbers. Where the early ledgers had shown modest but steady business, the receipt books from the later decades revealed something else entirely. Declining revenue, increasing costs, profits that shrank year by year until they disappeared altogether. "Look at this," Maya said, pointing to a page from 1967. "He's selling gas below cost. The wholesale price is here, and he's charging less than he paid for it." Tanner leaned over her shoulder. She was right. The math was simple and damning. He must have been subsidizing the price from other revenue. "What other revenue? The store sales?" Maya flipped through more pages. "Dad, he's losing money every month. How did he keep the place open?" That's when Tanner remembered his mother's jobs. She'd worked at the school cafeteria and then later at a nursing home. He'd always thought it was just what people did, both parents working, but maybe it had been necessity. Maybe his mother's income had been the only thing keeping the station afloat. He pulled out the journal, found the entries from the late 1960s. His father's tone had changed. Where the earlier entries had been matter-of-fact recordings of help given and received, these later ones carried a different weight. January 1968. The corporation has made their intentions clear. They want every independent station in the county. They've been to see me 3 times now. Each time the offer gets lower and the threats get less subtle. Tanner read the passage aloud. Maya looked up from the receipt books. "What corporation?" "I don't know yet." He continued reading. "They've already bought out Harrison's station in Pine Bluff and the Mitchell place in Grayson. Both owners held out at first, then suddenly couldn't get supplies from their regular distributors. Equipment started breaking down. Prices from wholesalers doubled overnight. Within 6 months, both stations were bankrupt." "That's illegal," Maya said. "Probably. But proving it is another matter." Tanner turned the page. "Dad writes here that he's documenting everything. Names, dates, conversations. He's talked to a lawyer." The entries over the next months painted a picture of mounting pressure. Mysterious supply delays, wholesale prices that fluctuated wildly, equipment failures that seemed suspiciously timed, And through it all, his father's determination to stay independent, to keep serving the community. March 1970. Another station owner called today, Ferguson from over in Clayton County. Said the corporation made him an offer he's going to take. He advised me to do the same. Said fighting them is pointless. Maybe he's right. But if I sell, this town loses its only independent station. People here can barely afford gas now. If the corporation takes over, prices will double. I've seen it happen in every place they've bought out. Maya was reading over his shoulder now. This is like a movie. The big corporation versus the small business owner. Except it's real, and in real life, the small business owner usually loses. They kept reading. The entries grew more desperate. By 1971, his father was taking out loans to keep the station operational. The banks were reluctant, suspecting a losing battle. But James Ryse persisted. June 1972. Martha is sick. Doctor says it might be serious. Need to go to Lincoln for tests. The station is barely breaking even. If I have to close for medical expenses, that's it. The corporation wins. Martha. His mother. Tanner felt his chest tighten. He'd never known exactly when her illness started. By the time he came home from college, she was already in treatment. Maya was very quiet. Grandma got sick. Yeah. The next entries were sporadic, as if his father had been too overwhelmed to maintain his usual discipline. Brief notes about medical appointments, test results, treatment options, and woven through it all, the ongoing battle with the corporation. September 1972. They've made it clear, sell or be destroyed. But if I sell, this town loses. Families will pay twice as much for gas. Small farmers won't be able to afford fuel for their equipment. I can't do that to them. But the cost is higher than I imagined. Medical bills, the station failing, the kids suffering. Have I been noble or just a stubborn fool? Tanner closed the journal, unable to read more for the moment. This was the answer to so many questions. This was why his father had become silent and withdrawn. Not because he was cold or unfeeling, but because he was drowning and didn't know how to ask for help. Dad. Maya's voice was soft. The nursing home. That's where Grandma worked, right? Yeah, after the school cafeteria job. When did she start working there? Tanner tried to remember. I'm not sure exactly. I was in college. Maybe 1972 or 73. Maya pulled out her phone, started typing. I'm looking at old county records. There's a nursing home listed, Millbrook Care Center. It closed in 1998. That's the one. Dad, nursing home workers didn't make much money, especially not back then. Tanner knew where she was going with this. She was working to pay for her own medical treatment and to keep the station running, so Grandpa could keep fighting the corporation. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of this revelation settling over them. His mother had worked while sick to prop up a failing business, not because the business mattered, but because her husband believed it was the right thing to do. She'd sacrificed her health, her comfort, her time with her children, so that strangers in the community wouldn't have to pay higher gas prices. It was noble and tragic and infuriating all at once. I need to call Uncle Jack, Tanner said. His brother answered on the third ring. Please tell me you're done playing detective. Jack, did you know about the corporation trying to buy out Dad's station, about the pressure campaign? A long pause. Where did you hear about that? Dad's journal. He documented everything. Jack, he was fighting to keep the station independent so people in town wouldn't get gouged on prices. I know. The simple statement stopped Tanner cold. You knew? Of course I knew. I was living here, Tanner. I watched it happen. Dad asked me to help him at the station, wanted me to take it over, expand it, fight back. I refused. I told him it was a losing battle and he should take the corporation's offer while it was still decent. What did he say? He said he couldn't do that to the people who depended on him. I told him those people would survive, but our family might not. We fought about it for months. Eventually, I started my own business because I knew his was going under and I had a family to support. Tanner heard the old anger in his brother's voice, but also something else. Guilt, maybe, or regret. Did Mom know? Tanner asked. About the corporation? Of course. She backed him. Said he was doing the right thing, that someone had to stand up to bullies. She worked herself sick, literally worked herself to death to help him do it. Jack's voice broke slightly. So, yeah, I knew. And I hated watching it. Hated seeing them sacrifice everything for principle. Hated that he couldn't just be practical for once and take care of his own family first. I'm sorry, Tanner said. I didn't know you'd been through all that. You weren't here. You were at college, then you had your own life. Caroline escaped even earlier. I was the one who stayed and watched them destroy themselves trying to be good people. After the call ended, Tanner told Maya what Jack had said. She listened quietly, then said, "Being good is hard." "Yeah, but being bad is worse. Right?" Tanner looked at his daughter, saw the question in her eyes. She wasn't just asking about her grandfather anymore. She was asking about life, about choices, about what mattered. "Yeah," he said. "Being bad is worse. But sometimes being good costs more than you think you can afford to pay." They sat in the ruins of the gas station as afternoon faded into evening, surrounded by the evidence of his father's choices. The ledgers showed generosity, the receipt books showed sacrifice, and the journal showed the terrible price of trying to do the right thing in a world that didn't always reward righteousness. The county archives were housed in the basement of the courthouse, a cramped space that smelled of old paper and mildew. Mrs. Patterson had given them access, moved by the story of what they'd discovered at the station. "Your father was a good man," she'd said, unlocking the door to the records room. "Not many people knew how good. Take whatever time you need." Tanner and Maya spent the day pulling hospital records, business licenses, property transfers, anything that might fill in the gaps in their father's story. What emerged was a detailed picture of financial ruin undertaken deliberately, eyes open for the sake of principle. The hospital records showed his mother's cancer treatment had started in 1969, earlier than Tanner had known. 3 years of chemotherapy, radiation, experimental treatments. The bills were staggering, even by modern standards. Adjusted for inflation, they'd spent what amounted to a small fortune trying to save her life. Property records told another story. In 1970, James Ryse had sold 20 acres of land that had been in the family for generations. The sale price was below market value, suggesting desperation. The money had gone to medical bills and keeping the station operational. In 1972, he'd taken out a second mortgage on the house. That money, too, had disappeared into the black hole of medical expenses and business losses. In 1974, he'd sold another 10 acres. This time, Tanner noted the buyer, a subsidiary of Coastal Petroleum Corporation. "That's the company," Maya said, looking at the document. "That has to be them." Tanner pulled out his phone and searched for Coastal Petroleum Corporation. What he found made his stomach turn. The company had consolidated with several others in the 1980s, eventually becoming part of a massive energy conglomerate that now operated in 40 states. They were worth billions. They had political connections at the highest levels. They were untouchable. And in 1974, when his father was drowning in debt and desperate for cash, they'd bought his land at a discount. "This is how they win," Tanner said quietly. "They pressure you until you're desperate, then they buy your assets for pennies." Maya was reading something on her laptop. "Dad, look at this. There's a lawsuit from 1974, James Ryse versus Coastal Petroleum Corporation." "What?" She turned the screen so he could see. The court documents were public record, scanned and uploaded to a legal database. Tanner began reading. His father had filed suit alleging anti-competitive practices, monopolistic behavior, and conspiracy to destroy independent businesses. The allegations were detailed and specific. His father had documented everything: the suspicious equipment failures, the supply delays, the coordinated pressure campaign that had driven other station owners out of business. He'd worked with a lawyer named Harold Klein. The case had been filed in January 1974. By March, it had been withdrawn. No explanation in the public record. "Why did he drop it?" Maya asked. "I don't know. Maybe he couldn't afford to continue. Or maybe—" Tanner remembered something from the journal. He pulled it out, found the entry from March 1974. "Klein called today, said he can't represent me anymore. Said his firm is under pressure from clients who don't want him going after Coastal. He tried to dress it up in legal language, but the message was clear. They got to him. He's scared. I don't blame him. He has a family to protect." "They threatened his lawyer," Maya said. "Yeah. Can they do that? If they're powerful enough, they can do pretty much anything." Tanner kept reading. "Dad writes here that he tried to find another lawyer, but no one would take the case. He was blacklisted. Effectively, they'd made it impossible for him to fight back legally." The journal entries from the mid-1970s were painful to read. His mother's condition worsening, the station's finances deteriorating, his father's growing despair at being trapped between principle and practicality. One entry stood out. June 1975, "Martha said something today that I can't stop thinking about. She said, 'You're going to die on this hill, aren't you?' She didn't mean it literally, though God knows this stress might kill us both. She meant I'm not going to give up, no matter what it costs. And she's right. I don't know how to give up, but I'm starting to understand what surrender would look like." Japonis Atsians. Mother died in April 1976. Tanner had come home from college for the funeral, stayed a week, then returned to finish his semester. He'd been 23 years old, the same age his father had been when he'd started helping Dust Bowl families. But unlike his father, Tanner had run from difficulty instead of toward it. After his mother's death, the journal entries became sporadic. His father seemed to lose interest in documenting the fight with Coastal Petroleum. The entries were brief, factual, emotionally distant. "He gave up," Maya said softly, reading over Tanner's shoulder. "After Grandma died, he just gave up." "Not completely. He kept the station running for another 30 years. But he stopped fighting. Look, no more entries about the corporation, no more documentation. He just kept going through the motions." She was right. The journal from 1976 onward was a chronicle of quiet defeat. His father had continued operating the station at a loss, subsidized by his savings and the sale of assets. He'd kept prices low for his customers, continued to help people when they needed it, maintained his principles even as they hollowed him out from the inside. But the fire that had driven him to document everything, to organize resistance, to fight back, that fire had died with his wife. Tanner's phone rang. "Caroline." "Jack told me what you found," she said without preamble. "About the corporation, about Mom working while she was sick." "Yeah. I didn't know. I knew she was working, but I don't know what I thought." Caroline's voice was strained. "I've spent 30 years being angry at Dad for being distant and cold. Now I find out he was just broken." "We were all broken," Tanner said. "We just broke in different ways. I need to see it. The journal, the documents. Can you make copies?" "Better than that. Maya's been scanning everything. She can send you the files." "Your daughter's doing this with you?" "Yeah. How is she? I know she had a rough time at the funeral." Tanner looked at Maya, who was photographing another page of the journal. "She's struggling. We're both struggling. But maybe we're struggling together now, which is better than doing it separately." After the call, Tanner and Maya gathered their materials and headed back to the station. The demolition crew's equipment sat idle, waiting for the go-ahead to finish the job. Jack had granted them the week, but time was running out. That evening, sitting in the ruins with flashlights and thermoses of coffee, Tanner made a decision. "I'm going to find Harold Klein," he said. "The lawyer Dad worked with. He's probably retired by now, maybe even dead. But if he's alive, I want to talk to him." "Why?" "The case was 45 years ago. Because Dad couldn't finish what he started. Maybe we can." Maya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's crazy. You can't fight a billion-dollar corporation." "Maybe not, but I can try to understand why Dad thought it was worth attempting. And maybe I can make sure his story gets told, even if we can't win any kind of justice. People will think you're being sentimental. Let them think that." Maya smiled, the first genuine smile Tanner had seen from her in months. "Okay, then let's find the lawyer." They worked into the night, searching online for any trace of Harold Klein. Tanner found him eventually, living in a retirement community 2 towns over, 84 years old, still listed in the state bar directory, though he'd been inactive for 20 years. The next morning, they drove to see him. Harold Klein lived in a modest apartment in Riverside Manor, a retirement community that tried very hard to not look like the place people went when they had nowhere else to go. The lobby had fresh flowers and comfortable furniture. Residents played cards in a common area. Everything was clean and bright and carefully maintained. Klein himself was a small man, shrunken by age but sharp-eyed. He invited them into his apartment with obvious curiosity. "You're James Rice's son," he said to Tanner. "I can see it in your face. You have his eyes. You remember him." "Of course I remember him. I've spent 40 years regretting how I failed him." Klein gestured for them to sit. "When Jack called yesterday to say you were coming, I almost said no, but I figured I owe your father the courtesy of honesty, even if it comes too late to matter." Tanner pulled out a copy of the lawsuit filing. "We found this in the county records and Dad's journal. He wrote that your firm was pressured to drop his case." Klein's face tightened. "That's a polite way to put it." He was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "You have to understand the context. This was 1974. Coastal Petroleum was already a major player in the industry. My firm was small, 3 partners, 2 associates. We did mostly small business law, some real estate, occasional civil litigation." "How did Dad end up working with you?" "He approached us with documentation. Months of detailed records showing a systematic campaign to drive independent gas stations out of business. I read through it all and told him he had a solid case. The evidence was there: price manipulation, supply interference, coordinated pressure tactics. It was textbook anti-competitive behavior." Klein stood and walked to a filing cabinet, pulled out a folder. "I kept copies. Probably shouldn't have, but I did. I think part of me always hoped I'd get a chance to explain, to apologize." He handed the folder to Tanner. Inside were photocopies of documents, correspondence, legal briefs. The case James Ryse had tried to build against Coastal Petroleum. "We filed in January," Klein continued. "By February, things started happening. One of my partners got a call from his biggest client, a real estate development company. They said if we continued representing Ryse, they'd take their business elsewhere. The client represented about 30% of our firm's revenue." "They threatened you financially," Maya said. "That was just the beginning. Our other major client, a regional bank, suddenly had concerns about our firm's judgment. An associate received a job offer from a much bigger firm, contingent on us dropping the case. My own wife got a call from someone claiming to be a reporter, asking about our family, our finances, our personal life." Klein sat down heavily. "I was 40 years old. I had 3 kids, a mortgage, a career I'd built over 15 years, and suddenly everything was at risk because I'd agreed to take on a case against a corporation that had unlimited resources and no ethics. "So you dropped it," Tanner said, trying to keep judgment out of his voice. "So I dropped it. I called your father, gave him some excuse about conflicts of interest and legal strategy. He saw right through me. Said, they got to you. It wasn't even a question. He knew." "What did he say?" "He said he understood, that he didn't blame me, that I had a family to protect." Klein's eyes were wet. "But I did blame me. I've blamed myself for 40 years. I was a coward, pure and simple. I let a good man fight alone because I was too scared to stand with him." Tanner opened the folder, began reading through the documents. The case Klein had built was comprehensive. Evidence of price fixing, documented instances of supply manipulation, testimony from other station owners who'd been driven out of business. If they'd gone to trial, they might have won. "What happened after you withdrew?" Tanner asked. "Your father tried to find other representation. I called colleagues, tried to help, but the word had gone out. Coastal Petroleum was off limits. No one would touch it. Eventually, he gave up the legal fight. But he kept the station open. For another 30 years, I heard. Operated at a loss most of that time, kept prices low for the community. He did what he could, even without legal recourse." Maya was reading through the documents, her expression growing more intense. "Mr. Klein, this evidence, it's all here. The conspiracy, the illegal tactics. Does it matter that the case was never tried?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, is there a statute of limitations on this kind of thing? Could someone refile?" Klein considered. The original anti-competitive claims would be well past any statute of limitations. But there might be other angles. Fraud, conspiracy, civil RICO violations. Those have longer time frames, especially if you can argue ongoing harm. "Ongoing harm," Tanner repeated. "Like the fact that Coastal Petroleum, through its successor companies, still dominates the market in this region." "Exactly. If you could show that the original illegal campaign led to market consolidation that continues to harm consumers today, you might have a case." Tanner felt something shift inside him. Not quite hope, but something adjacent to it. Purpose, maybe. "Would you help us?" Klein looked at him for a long moment. "Son, I'm 84 years old. I haven't practiced law in 20 years, and I already failed your father once." "That's not a no. It's not a yes either. What you're talking about, going after a corporation that's now worth billions, exposing practices from decades ago, it's difficult and expensive and probably futile. But possible. Possible? Maybe. Probable. No." Klein paused. "Your father tried this once, and it cost him everything. Why would you want to repeat his mistake?" "Because it wasn't a mistake," Tanner said. "He fought for what was right. He lost, but he fought. And maybe that matters more than winning." Maya was still reading through the documents. Suddenly, she stopped, her finger on a specific page. "Dad, look at this. There's a list here of other station owners who were driven out. Dates, locations, tactics used against each one. It's like a roadmap of how Coastal operated." She turned the page toward Tanner. The list was comprehensive. 23 gas station owners across 5 counties, all forced out of business between 1968 and 1974. Next to each name was documentation of the tactics used. Supply delays, equipment sabotage, wholesale price manipulation, intimidation. "This isn't just about Dad's station," Maya said. "This was systematic. They did this to everyone who wouldn't sell." Klein nodded. That was the pattern. Coastal would move into a region, identify all the independent operators, make offers to buy them out. Those who refused faced coordinated pressure until they either sold or went bankrupt. Your father was the last holdout in this entire area. "Are any of these other owners still alive?" Tanner asked. "Some, probably. Most would be in their 80s or 90s now. But yes, there might be others who remember. who have their own documentation. Tanner felt the pieces coming together. This wasn't just his father's story. It was a pattern of corporate predation that had destroyed dozens of small businesses and reshaped the economic landscape of the entire region. "We need to find them," he said. "The other owners or their families. We need to collect their stories, their evidence." "To what end?" Klein asked. "I don't know yet. Maybe a lawsuit. Maybe a documentary. Maybe just making sure the truth gets told." Tanner stood. "Mr. Klein, I understand you can't help us officially. But would you be willing to share what you know, the legal strategy you planned, the arguments you were going to make?" Klein was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Yes, I think I owe your father that much. And maybe I owe myself the chance to finish what I started, even if it's just as an advisor." As they were leaving, Klein called after them. "Tanner, one more thing. Be prepared for what you might uncover. Your father's case was just the tip of the iceberg. Coastal's practices went far beyond what we documented, and they had protection at very high levels. Political connections, regulators who looked the other way, judges who dismissed cases before they got to trial. Are you saying we shouldn't try? I'm saying know what you're getting into. Your father fought this battle and it destroyed him. Make sure you're willing to pay the same price." In the car, Maya was unusually quiet. Finally, she said, "We're really doing this? Going after $1 billion corporation?" "I don't know if we're going after them, but we're going to tell the story, make sure people know what happened." "That could be enough. Stories can change things." Tanner looked at his daughter, 16 years old, idealistic, seeing possibilities where he only saw obstacles. When had she grown up? When had she become someone who thought about justice and truth and the power of stories? "Yeah," he said. "Stories can change things." They drove back to the station, the folder of evidence on the back seat. 40 years of secrets finally coming to light. And Tanner felt, for the first time since his father's death, that he was doing something that mattered. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of activity. Tanner and Maya set up a makeshift command center in the motel room, covering every available surface with documents, photographs, and timelines. Maya created a digital database, scanning everything and organizing it by date and type. Tanner made phone calls, tracked down the families of other station owners, slowly building a network of people who remembered. Jack arrived on the third day, looking skeptical and worried. "Tell me you're not doing what I think you're doing." "Depends on what you think I'm doing." "Starting a war with a corporation that could bury you without even noticing." Jack surveyed the organized chaos of the motel room. "This is crazy, Tanner. Dad tried this 40 years ago and lost everything. So we just forget about it. Let them win? They already won. 40 years ago, this is just you tilting at windmills." Caroline called an hour later. She'd been following the story remotely, receiving updates from Maya. "I want in," she said simply. "Whatever you're planning, count me in." "You don't even know what we're planning yet." "Doesn't matter. Jack said you're going after Coastal Petroleum, that's enough." By evening, all three siblings were gathered at the station. Tanner spread out what they'd found: Klein's legal briefs, the journal entries, the list of other affected station owners. 17 of the 23 owners on this list are dead, Tanner said, but 6 are still alive. I've talked to 4 of them. They all remember. They all have their own documentation, letters, records, evidence of the pressure campaign. "And?" Jack asked. "And they're angry. One man, George Ferguson, he had a station in Clayton County, said he's been waiting 40 years for someone to do something about this. He kept everything, dated logs of every suspicious equipment failure, every supply delay, every conversation with Coastal representatives." Caroline leaned forward. "So we have multiple witnesses, documentation spanning 6 years, evidence of a coordinated campaign. That's a case. It's the beginning of a case, Tanner corrected. Klein thinks we might be able to argue ongoing harm, that the illegal consolidation from the 1970s led to the monopolistic market conditions that exist today. You've talked to Klein about this? Yesterday. He's willing to help in an advisory capacity. He's too old to practice, but he knows the legal landscape. Jack shook his head. You realize what you're suggesting? A lawsuit against a multi-billion-dollar corporation based on events from 40 years ago, filed by 3 people who aren't lawyers and have no money for legal fees. We don't need money yet. We just need the truth documented. The truth? Jack's laugh was bitter. The truth is that corporations like Coastal have lawyers on retainer who specialize in burying cases like this. They'll file motion after motion, drag it out for years, bankrupt you with legal fees before you even get to discovery. So what? We just let them get away with it. They already got away with it. Jack's frustration boiled over. Dad tried to fight them. He lost. Mom died. The station failed. We grew up poor because our parents chose principle over practicality. And now you want to repeat that mistake? The silence that followed was heavy. Then Caroline spoke, her voice quiet but firm. Jack, do you remember what you said at Dad's funeral? I said a lot of things. You said he had an ironclad work ethic, that he never gave up, no matter how hard things got. That was a eulogy. You say nice things at funerals. But it was true. He didn't give up. He kept fighting, kept the station open, kept serving the community even when it cost him everything. Caroline looked at her brothers. I've spent 30 years resenting him for being distant, for not being the father I wanted. And now I understand why. He was distant because he was drowning. He was drowning because he refused to surrender to bullies. And maybe that's worth something. Jack was quiet. Then, what exactly are you proposing? Tanner pulled out a legal pad covered with notes. First, we document everything. Every station owner, every tactic, every piece of evidence. We create a comprehensive record of what Coastal did. Then we contact journalists. Local papers first, then regional media. We make this a story. A human interest piece about a small-town hero who fought a corporation and lost. Media attention doesn't win lawsuits. No, but it creates pressure. And it might shake loose other victims, other evidence. Klein says there were probably dozens of stations affected beyond these 23. If we can find more, build a bigger pattern, the case gets stronger. Maya, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. I've been researching Coastal's merger history. They consolidated with another company in 1982, then again in 1990, then became part of Allied Energy in 2003. Allied operates in 40 states now. So if we can show that Allied's current market dominance was built on illegal practices from the 1970s, we're not just talking about historical wrongs. We're talking about ongoing harm to millions of consumers. Jack studied his niece with new respect. You've been thinking about this. I've been angry about it. Grandpa tried to do the right thing and got destroyed for it. That's not okay. No, Jack agreed. It's not okay. But wanting justice and getting justice are 2 very different things. Maybe. But we have to try, don't we? The question hung in the air. Finally, Jack nodded. Okay, I'm in. But we do this smart. We document everything. We talk to lawyers, real lawyers, not just Klein. And we don't make any moves until we're certain we have a case that can survive. Over the next week, the investigation expanded. Tanner contacted the local newspaper, and a young reporter named Sarah Chen became interested in the story. She interviewed the surviving station owners, documented their experiences, and began researching Coastal Petroleum's history. This is bigger than I thought, she said after a week of research. I've found similar patterns in 3 other states. Small-town gas stations mysteriously going out of business in the late 60s and early 70s, always in regions where Coastal was expanding. Can you prove a connection? Not yet, But the pattern is suspicious, and if your documentation is as good as you say, combined with these other cases, it starts to look like a nationwide campaign. The story ran in the local paper on a Sunday. Local heroes fight against big oil, a story of courage and sacrifice. It was front page, with a photograph of James Ryse standing in front of the station in its prime and a sidebar showing the current ruins. The response was immediate. By Monday, the regional paper had picked it up. By Tuesday, a television station in Lincoln sent a crew to interview Tanner and the surviving station owners. By Wednesday, the story was on the newswire, and papers across the state were running versions of it. And then Allied Energy's lawyers called. The letter arrived via certified mail. It was 10 pages of dense legal language, but the message was clear. Cease and desist. Stop making allegations against Allied Energy and its predecessor companies. Stop claiming illegal activity. Stop giving interviews that damage their reputation, or face legal consequences. Jack read the letter and swore. This is exactly what I was afraid of. They're going to bury us in legal threats before we even start. But Tanner felt something else. Validation. They wouldn't threaten us if we didn't have something real. If this was all nonsense, they'd ignore us. Or they're just protecting themselves against reputational damage. Maybe, but Klein says a letter like this is standard intimidation. They're hoping we'll get scared and shut up. It's working, Jack muttered. Caroline, however, was reading the letter with growing interest. This is stupid on their part. Every allegation they tell us not to make is an admission that we're talking about things they'd prefer stayed buried. That's actually a good point, Tanner said. Maya was recording all of this with her phone. I'm documenting everything. Every threat, every piece of pressure, it's all going online. Maya, that might not be safe. It's safer than hiding. Once it's public, they can't make it disappear. She was right, Tanner realized. His daughter understood something about modern activism that he didn't. That transparency was protection, that documenting everything in real time made it harder for powerful entities to operate in shadows. The next development came from an unexpected source. A law firm in Chicago, specialists in corporate malfeasance and class action litigation, reached out. They'd seen the news coverage and reviewed the documentation Tanner had shared with reporters. We think you have a case, the senior partner, a woman named Patricia Morrison, said over the phone. Not just for your father's situation, but potentially a class action representing all the station owners who were forced out. On what grounds? Civil RICO. If we can prove an ongoing criminal enterprise, which the pattern of behavior suggests, the statute of limitations extends significantly. Plus, Allied Energy's current market position is arguably the direct result of illegal monopolistic practices. We could seek both damages for the original victims and injunctive relief to break up the current monopoly. It sounded too good to be true. What's the catch? The catch is that this will take years and cost millions. We'd work on contingency, but you and the other victims would need to be prepared for a long fight. Allied will throw everything at us, motions to dismiss, discovery battles, attempts to exhaust our resources, and they'll come after you personally. Your finances, your history, anything they can use to discredit you. Tanner thought about his father, fighting alone, abandoned by his lawyer, destroyed by the corporation he'd challenged. When do we start? By the end of the second week, the family had made their decision. They would proceed with a lawsuit. They would represent not just their father, but all the small business owners who'd been destroyed by Coastal's campaign. They would accept the personal risks, the financial uncertainty, the years of legal battle ahead. Jack, ever practical, insisted on one condition. We don't tear down the station, not yet. If we're going to fight this fight, we need the physical evidence. The building, the records, everything stays intact until this is resolved. Caroline agreed. It's our father's monument to his courage, his sacrifice. It stays. That evening, the three siblings stood in the ruins of their father's gas station, surrounded by evidence of his life's work. And for the first time in decades, they felt united in purpose. The telegram was tucked into the back pages of the journal, yellowed and brittle. Tanner found it while preparing for the first meeting with Patricia Morrison's legal team. The date was March 15th, 1973. Notice of proceedings, it read, in the stilted formal language of legal documents. Coastal Petroleum Corporation hereby notifies James Ryse of intention to file eminent domain proceedings against property located at State Highway 14, Millbrook, Nebraska. Said property deemed necessary for Regional Fuel Distribution Center, proceedings to commence April 1st, 1973. They threatened to take the property by eminent domain, Tanner said, showing the telegram to Jack and Caroline. That's why he sold them the 20 acres. They were going to take the whole thing. Can they even do that? Caroline asked. Use eminent domain for a private company? If they have the right political connections. Yes. At least, they could threaten it convincingly enough to force a sale. Tanner photographed the telegram carefully. This is evidence of coercion. They weren't just applying market pressure, they were threatening legal action to seize his property. Maya had been researching eminent domain abuse in the 1970s. Dad, there are precedents. In cases where courts ruled that eminent domain was used improperly to benefit private corporations, the property transfers were voided decades later. The meeting with Morrison's legal team happened 3 days later in a conference room that overlooked downtown Chicago. 6 lawyers sat around a polished table, laptops open, notepads ready. Tanner felt like he was in a movie. Patricia Morrison was in her 50s, sharp-eyed and precise. Let me be clear about what we're attempting, she said. This is not a simple case. We're arguing that Allied Energy's current market position is the result of illegal activity conducted by its predecessor company 40 to 50 years ago. That's a difficult argument to make. But possible? Tanner asked. Possible, yes. We have several things in our favor. First, your father's documentation is extraordinary. The detail, the consistency, the corroboration from multiple sources, it's exactly what we need. Second, we've identified patterns of similar behavior in other states. Allied's regional monopolies aren't accidents. They're the result of systematic elimination of competition. She clicked to a presentation on the screen. Third, and this is crucial, we found the smoking gun. The screen showed internal Coastal Petroleum memos from 1971 obtained through a Freedom of Information request related to a different case. The memos detailed a strategy called Market Consolidation Initiative, a formal corporate program to eliminate independent operators through coordinated pressure tactics. This proves intent, Morrison continued. It's not just aggressive business practices. It's documented conspiracy to monopolize markets through illegal means. Jack leaned forward. How did you find this? The memos came out in a lawsuit in Texas in 1989. Coastal settled that case quickly and sealed the records, but the seal expired after 25 years, and the documents became public in 2014. No one's connected them to the broader pattern until now. Tanner felt his heart racing. This was real. They actually had a case. Here's what happens next, Morrison said. We file a class action lawsuit on behalf of all affected station owners or their estates. We're arguing RICO violations, monopolistic practices, fraud, and ongoing consumer harm. We'll seek damages for the original victims and structural relief, forced divestiture of some of Allied's assets to restore competitive markets. What are our chances? Caroline asked. Honestly? 30%. Maybe 40% if everything goes our way. Allied will fight this with everything they have. They'll argue statute of limitations, lack of standing, failure to state a claim. They'll try to get the case dismissed before we even reach discovery. But if we survive the initial motions, if we get to discovery, our chances improve significantly. We'll have access to Allied's internal records, emails, communications. If there's more evidence, and I believe there is, we'll find it. The response from Allied Energy came within a week of the lawsuit filing, not just from their lawyers, but from their public relations department. Press releases went out claiming the lawsuit was frivolous, based on events too old to be relevant, filed by opportunists seeking to profit from historical grievances. The local news covered the story. Some outlets framed it as a David versus Goliath battle. Others suggested the Ryse family was chasing money they weren't entitled to. Tanner's phone started ringing constantly. Some calls were supportive, other families reaching out with their own stories of being driven out of business. But others were hostile. People worried that the lawsuit would drive up gas prices, cost jobs, hurt the local economy. One evening, Tanner found a note tucked under his car's windshield wiper. "Let it go," it said simply. "Some fights aren't worth winning." He showed it to Jack, who swore. "They're trying to intimidate us." "They're succeeding," Tanner admitted. But the next morning, Maya showed him something that changed his perspective. She'd created a website documenting their father's story, the lawsuit, the evidence. It had gone viral, shared thousands of times across social media. "Look at the comments," she said. "People get it. They understand what Grandpa was fighting for, and they're behind us." Tanner read through the comments. Messages of support from across the country. Stories from other families who'd lost small businesses to corporate consolidation. Offers of help, donations to a legal fund Maya had set up without asking permission. "We're not alone in this," Maya said. "That's what Grandpa never had. But we do." The discovery that changed everything came from the most unlikely source: his father's funeral card. Tanner had found it while organizing the last of the documents from the tin box, preparing for the next round of legal depositions. The funeral card was standard. James Ryse's name, dates, a brief service announcement. But on the back, in his father's distinctive handwriting, was a message Tanner had somehow missed before. "If you're reading this, you found what I couldn't finish. The evidence is all there, in the ledgers, in the journal, in the files behind the counter. I tried to fight them alone and failed, but maybe you won't be alone. Don't let them win. They've won too much already. The tin box has everything you need. I'm sorry I couldn't finish this. I'm sorry for a lot of things, but I'm not sorry I tried." Dad. Tanner sat down hard, the funeral card trembling in his hands. His father had known, had planned for this, had left the evidence deliberately, hoping someone would continue the fight. He called an emergency family meeting. Jack and Caroline drove in. Maya was already there. They gathered at the station, not in the motel room, but right there in the ruins where their father had fought his lonely battle. "He wanted us to find this," Tanner said, showing them the message. "He left it all for us. The evidence, the documentation, everything. He knew we'd come back eventually." "Jesus," Jack whispered. "He was planning this even at the end." Caroline was crying. "I thought he'd just given up, just stopped caring, but he was leaving us the tools to finish what he started." "The question is," Tanner said, "are we going to finish it?" One by one they answered. Jack went first. "I've been angry at him for 30 years, angry that he chose principle over family, that he let his business fail rather than compromise. But I was wrong. He didn't choose principle over family. He chose principle for us. So we'd know that some things matter more than money." "Yeah, I'm in," Caroline nodded. "I've already committed. But this," she gestured to the funeral card, "this makes it personal in a different way. He believed in us. Believed we'd be better than he was. Stronger. We can't let him down." Maya spoke last. "I never knew him, not really. But through all of this, through the ledgers and the letters and the journal, I feel like I'm getting to know him now. And I like who he was. I like that he fought for what was right even when it cost him everything. So, yes, we finish it. The next phase of the lawsuit moved quickly. Patricia Morrison's team had filed a motion for expedited discovery based on the new evidence, the funeral card message, the eminent domain threat, the consolidated pattern of abuse across multiple states. Allied Energy fought back hard. They filed a motion to dismiss, arguing that the claims were too old, too speculative, too attenuated from current business practices. Their lawyers were exactly what Jack had predicted: aggressive, well-resourced, relentless. But something unexpected happened. The publicity around the case sparked a movement. Other families came forward, dozens, then hundreds. Sons and daughters of gas station owners, of small business owners in other industries, all with similar stories of corporate pressure and systematic elimination. A documentary filmmaker named Marcus Webb contacted them. "I want to tell your father's story," he said, "not just as a legal case, but as a human story about courage and sacrifice and what it costs to stand up to power." Maya became the face of the cause, giving interviews, organizing social media campaigns, connecting families who'd been through similar experiences. She was articulate and passionate and unafraid, everything Tanner wished he could be. The turning point came 6 months into the litigation. Allied Energy's lawyers made a mistake during depositions. They denied having any documentation of the Market Consolidation Initiative, the internal program from the 1971 memos. But Morrison's team had already found references to the same program in more recent documents from Allied's merger with another company in 2003. The program hadn't ended in the 1970s. It had continued, evolved, become part of Allied's corporate culture. "They lied under oath," Morrison explained, "which means we can now argue that the conspiracy is ongoing, not historical. That changes everything." Allied's legal team knew they'd made an error. Within a week, settlement discussions began. The terms were substantial: monetary compensation for the affected families, a fund to support rural small businesses, and most importantly, a consent decree requiring Allied to divest assets in markets where they held monopoly positions. But more than the legal victory, what mattered was the story. Marcus Webb's documentary aired on a major streaming platform. Newspapers across the country ran features. James Ryse became a symbol of small-town resistance to corporate power. The night before they signed the settlement agreement, Tanner stood alone at the gas station. In his hands was the pocket watch, the one engraved with thanks from a grateful town. "I understand now," he said to the empty air, to his father's memory, to himself. "You weren't silent because you didn't care. You were silent because you cared too much and didn't know how to say it." The watch ticked steadily in his palm, measuring time that moved forward, always forward, carrying the past into the future where it belonged. 6 months after the settlement, Tanner stood in front of what used to be his father's gas station and saw something impossible: a building reborn. The ruins had been carefully restored using photographs and architectural plans from the original construction. The wood was new but stained to match the old. The roof had been replaced with period-appropriate materials. Even the old Coca-Cola cooler had been salvaged and refurbished, now sitting in the corner of what would be the community center's main gathering space. Above the door hung a hand-painted sign: Ryse Family Community Center, established 2024. In memory of James Ryse, 1911-2023, a place of generosity, service, and hope. The settlement money had made it possible. After the legal fees and compensation for the other families, there had been enough left to establish a non-profit dedicated to preserving his father's legacy and serving the community. Jack had overseen the construction, bringing his contractor's expertise to bear. Caroline had handled the organizational logistics, creating bylaws and programming. Maya had designed the website and social media presence, and Tanner had relocated. Permanently this time. He'd accepted a position teaching history at Millbrook High School, had found a small house on the edge of town, had committed to staying. Maya was thriving. The distance from her old school, the purpose she'd found in the lawsuit and the community center project, had given her direction she'd been lacking. She was taking classes at the community college, talking about journalism school, about documentary filmmaking, about telling stories that mattered. The opening day celebration was larger than Tanner had anticipated. It seemed like the entire town had turned out, plus visitors from neighboring counties. The families who'd received compensation from the settlement were there. The Fergusons, the Mitchells, the Caldwells, all the descendants of people his father had helped during the Dust Bowl years. Ruth Sanderson, now 91 but still sharp, cut the ribbon with Tanner's help. "Your father would have hated this fuss," she said with a smile. "But he would have loved what you're building here." Inside, the restored station had been transformed into a multi-purpose community space. The main room where customers used to buy coffee and sandwiches was now a gathering area with tables and chairs. The old repair bay had become a computer lab, providing internet access to families who couldn't afford it at home. The storage area was now a small library, and everywhere, carefully displayed in protective cases, was the evidence of his father's life. The ledgers were there, open to random pages so visitors could see the careful notations. The letters of thanks were mounted on the walls. The photographs of Dust Bowl families were enlarged and hung throughout the space, each with a small placard explaining the story. The tin box sat in a place of honor, open now, its contents catalogued and preserved. Next to it was the pocket watch and the funeral card with his father's final message. Tanner gave a brief speech, keeping it simple. "My father was not a perfect man. He made mistakes. He hurt people he loved, but he also believed in something bigger than himself. He believed that you helped people when they needed help, not for recognition, not for reward, but because it was the right thing to do." He paused, looking out at the crowd. This building almost didn't exist. My siblings and I came very close to tearing it down, selling the land, moving on, and if we had, we never would have found the story hidden inside. We never would have understood who our father really was. Maya stood next to him, and he put his arm around her shoulders. "My daughter taught me something through all of this. She taught me that the past isn't junk to be demolished. It's foundation for what we build next. Everything we create now stands on the shoulders of what came before." After the ceremony, Tanner walked through the space, greeting people, accepting congratulations, feeling simultaneously proud and humbled. Harold Klein was there, having made the trip despite his age. "Your father would be proud," he said. "You finished what he started." "We all did," Tanner corrected. "None of this happens without everyone working together." Jack pulled him aside at one point. "I've been thinking about Dad, about how we remembered him. I spent so long being angry at who he wasn't that I never appreciated who he was. We all did that. Yeah, but I'm done with it now. I'm done being angry at a dead man for not being perfect. He did the best he could with what he had." Caroline found them later, tears in her eyes. "I miss him," she said simply. "I miss the father I never got to know. But at least now I understand him." As evening approached and the crowd thinned, Tanner found himself alone in the community center with Maya. They stood looking at the wall of photographs, all those faces from another era, all those stories of survival and kindness. "We're going to teach about this, right?" Maya asked. "About Grandpa, about what he did, about the lawsuit and the corporate conspiracy." "Absolutely. That's what this place is for. Preserving history, teaching lessons, making sure people remember." "Good. Because I think the most important lesson isn't about gas stations or corporations. It's about choosing to fight even when you know you might lose." Tanner looked at his daughter. 17 now, confident and passionate and wise beyond her years. "When did you get so smart?" "I had good teachers. Grandpa, even though I never met him, And you, once you figured out what mattered. They locked up the community center as darkness fell. Tomorrow they'd return to start the first programs, after-school tutoring, computer classes, support groups for families struggling with economic hardship. The work his father had done informally, they would now do systematically and sustainably. As they walked to the car, Tanner pulled out the pocket watch. His now, a gift from the estate. It ticked steadily, marking time, connecting past to present to future. "You know what the best part is?" Maya said. "Grandpa's been dead less than a year, but he's more alive now than he ever was. His story, his impact, it's growing. That's immortality in a way." Tanner thought about his father. Young and idealistic, helping Dust Bowl families. Middle-aged and determined, fighting corporate power. Old and silent, leaving evidence for those who would come after. "Yeah," he said. "I think you're right." They drove home through streets Tanner was learning to call familiar again, past houses where lights were coming on, where families were gathering for dinner, where life continued in its ordinary, extraordinary way. And Tanner felt, for the first time in 3 years, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Not running from grief, not hiding from difficulty, but standing firm like his father had taught him. Quietly, stubbornly, generously standing firm. The past had been restored, the future could be built, and in the space between, in the present moment, there was work to do and people to help and stories to tell. His father's work was done, but their work, his and Maya's and his siblings and the community's, was just beginning.